So think about this for a second. What if the sacred text, the one you're reading right now, isn't actually a book at all?
Right. What if it's something entirely different?
Yeah, exactly. What if beneath all the standard chapters and verses, it's actually this highly engineered three-dimensional blueprint, like something designed to literally rewrite your cognitive geography?
It's a wild concept, honestly.
Yeah.
Because usually when we approach any text, there's this built-in expectation.
Oh, totally. You expect a straightforward journey. You start at chapter 1, you follow the narrative arc, and boom, you arrive at the conclusion.
Right. It's a linear progression.
Yeah.
I like to think of it as walking down a well-lit hallway. You just keep walking forward.
A well-lit hallway is a great way to put it. But when you step into the world of ancient textual analysis, and specifically the kind of structural analysis we're diving into today, that well-lit hallway just completely dissolves.
It vanishes.
It really does. We find ourselves looking at a structural landscape that is, frankly, completely alien to our modern linear reading habits. So today, for you listening, we're going to explore what actually happens when you stop reading a text as a sequence of stories and you start analyzing it as a literal spatial temporal map.
And doing that requires a really fundamental paradigm shift. I mean, in how we process information in general. We're moving away from just, passively consuming words on a page.
Right, no passive reading here.
Exactly. We're moving toward the active navigation of an architectural space. The foundational premise here is that the arrangement of the information is just as critical, if not more critical, than the information itself.
The structure is the message.
The structure is the message, yes.
And the architect we are focusing on today, the entire focus of this deep dive, actually is Dr. Khaled Waleed. We are going to be unpacking his extensive structural analysis, which is titled The Matrix of Bakkah, Mapping Prophetic Identity and Universal Guidance.
It's a massive piece of work.
It really is. And looking through his research, it is an incredibly specific architectural claim to make about a religious text. He's essentially arguing that the arrangement of certain chapters isn't just thematic.
Chronological, yeah.
Right, it's not a coincidence. He posits that it is a literal blueprint for a cognitive defense system.
A contemplation engineering matrix, to use Dr. Khaled Waleed's exact terminology.
Contemplation engineering, I love that phrase.
It's very descriptive. But before we get into the complex mechanics of how his proposed matrix actually operates, we really need to establish some very strict ground rules for you listening.
Yes, absolutely. This is crucial.
Because Dr. Waleed's analytical framework deals with some deeply theological, historical, and geographical concepts.
Yeah.
Throughout his text, he uses terms like, Israel or the children of Israel and the East.
Right.
But he is using these terms in highly specific archetypal ways within his structural theory.
And we really need to emphasize that distinction right at the top. In Dr. Khaled Waleed's framework, these specific terms represent an existential, almost cosmic conflict between what he identifies as a good tree and a bad tree.
Exactly. He's building a structural theory of morality and cognitive mapping.
And so our mission today, and we want to be crystal clear about this for you listening, is strictly analytical and impartial. We are functioning as neutral guides through his research.
Just mapping the map, so to speak.
Right. We are not here to take sides. We are not endorsing any political viewpoints, and we're definitely not validating any historical or geographical claims made in the source material.
No, not at all.
Our sole objective is to impartially unpack Dr. Khaled Waleed's intricate linguistic and structural theory. We just want you to understand the underlying logic of how his matrix of Bakkah functions as a theoretical piece of textual engineering. We're just looking at the blueprints he drew up.
That's the exact approach we have to take. We're examining the mechanics of his argument, not the ultimate veracity of it.
Exactly.
And the core thesis we're exploring from Dr. Khaled Waleed revolves around a very specific sequence of 5 Quranic chapters. That's El-Jinn, Al-Muzammil, Al-Mudaththir, Al-Qiyamah, and Al-Insan.
Right, those 5 specifically.
Yeah. And normally, a reader might approach these as just separate instances of revelation, maybe loosely connected by a broad theme or a timeline.
But Dr. Khaled Waleed posits that this specific sequence is absolutely not a random arrangement.
Right.
He argues that it functions as a strict cosmic, psychological, and educational protocol. It's a roadmap designed to install a highly specific cognitive state in the reader.
Yeah, that contemplation engineering idea.
Exactly. It implies that the text is doing active work on your psychology while you process it. It's like structural programming. So if we are adopting this architectural approach, where does Dr. Khaled Waleed even begin this roadmap? What is the foundational premise that anchors this whole matrix?
Well, according to Dr. Khaled Waleed, the anchor is what he calls the universal law of guidance.
The universal law of guidance. Okay.
Yeah. And to understand this law, you have to grasp the existential struggle that he outlines in his research. He argues that the sequence of these 5 chapters tells a continuous structural story of a struggle between 2 models of humanity.
Okay. What are the 2 models?
On one side, you have the children of Adam, which his framework represents as the good tree. And on the other side, you have Israel, which his framework represents as the bad tree.
Okay, so that's a massive cosmic struggle. But to make this somewhat relatable to human psychology, Dr. Waleed utilizes an analogy in his text, right?
He does, yeah. It grounds a very abstract theological concept in basic human behavioral psychology.
Right. So he introduces this analogy of a father and a family dynamic. In his analogy, you are asked to imagine a father who represents the Lord of the worlds, like the ultimate educator of all creation. And imagine this father has a rebellious son.
A son who explicitly breaks a core covenant.
Exactly, who disobeys a fundamental family rule. Dr. Waleed asks, what is the natural psychological reaction of that father when he has to educate his other children?
Well, the most effective educational tool in that scenario is to use the rebellious son as a cautionary tale.
Right.
The father points to the son who broke the rules and says to the rest of the family, look closely at his behavior. Look at the consequences of his actions. Do not make the same mistakes.
You utilize the negative example to guide and protect the rest of the family.
Exactly. To keep them from falling into the same behavioral pitfalls.
And applied on a cosmic scale, Dr. Khaled Waleed maps this directly onto his matrix. He states that, within this text, Israel represents that rebellious son who broke the divine covenant.
Right.
And God, functioning as the ultimate educator, places this specific bad example squarely in front of humanity, the children of Adam, who, in this framework, carry the ultimate trust.
Yes.
The text structurally places this example in front of them as a severe, unavoidable warning.
And this cautionary dynamic is really the driving engine of Dr. Khaled Waleed's entire theory. The matrix exists entirely to keep the children of Adam from falling into the exact same behavioral traps as the rebellious son.
So the text is engineered to constantly remind the reader to avoid that path.
Precisely.
Okay, the cautionary tale logic makes total sense as a psychological tool. But if you're listening and trying to visualize this as a highly engineered cosmic roadmap, well, a map requires a definitive starting point.
It does.
You don't just drop a reader into the middle of a complex warning system without establishing the boundaries. How does Dr. Khaled Waleed structurally set the stage before he even introduces the prophet or these specific warnings?
Well, that brings us directly into phase 1 of Dr. Khaled Waleed's matrix. He argues that the structure doesn't actually start with the prophet or the warning at all.
Oh, really? Where does it start?
It starts by mapping a massive systemic shift in cosmic communication. He begins his analysis with the very first chapter of this 5-part sequence, which is Al-Jinn.
Okay, Al-Jinn, which translates to the jinn, or unseen spirits. Now, if I'm reading a standard translation, I'm reading about unseen entities. How does Dr. Khaled Waleed turn a chapter about unseen spirits into step 1 of a cognitive defense matrix? Like, what's his mechanism for that?
So, in Dr. Khaled Waleed's framework, this chapter acts as a cosmic diagnosis. He's not reading it purely as a narrative about spirits. He reads it as an assessment and a dismantling of an old, corrupted communication network.
A communication network, okay.
Yeah. He focuses on how the text describes these entities attempting to listen in on the divine revelation and finding the heavens suddenly guarded.
Ah, so it's a diagnosis of the communication system itself.
Exactly. Dr. Khaled Waleed argues that Al-Jinn is fundamentally about disconnecting a specific compromised broadcast.
A broadcast?
Yes. He points out that the text describes the authoritative dismantling of a network of revelation that previously existed. And here is where his geographical mapping becomes super central to his theory.
Okay, let's get into the geography.
He claims that this chapter signifies the authoritative cutting off of the broadcast to demons and jinn, whom he specifically identifies in his text as the sorcerers of the eastern villages in Petra.
Okay, wait, let me pause you right there. Because mapping the jinn to actual sorcerers in Petra is a massive historical and textual leap.
It is a big leap.
Right. A skeptical listener is immediately going to ask, how does Dr. Waleed justify twisting a chapter about unseen spirits into a literal server migration happening in Jordan? What's the analytical evidence for that specific geographic claim?
I get that. It requires understanding his specific methodology of structural hermeneutics. Dr. Khaled Waleed isn't looking at jinn merely as, like, ethereal ghosts.
Okay.
He analyzes the linguistic roots and the historical context of the East in ancient Arabian geography. In his theory, the eastern villages, specifically around Petra, were historical hubs of sorcery, esoteric knowledge, and what he calls eavesdropping on divine secrets. Yeah. He argues that the text uses the term jinn to archetypally represent these corrupted earthly networks of occult knowledge that basically attempted to interface with the divine without authorization.
Wow. Okay, let me see if I can translate his framework into a modern analogy for the listener.
Sure.
Imagine a massive global broadcasting company. And for centuries, they've been broadcasting on a specific frequency. Let's call it the Eastern frequency. But over time, that frequency has been hacked.
Right, compromised.
Yeah, you have eavesdroppers, pirates, people tapping into the signal, corrupting the data, and using it for their own power.
That aligns perfectly with his concept of the corrupted network. The old system is compromised by unauthorized access.
So according to Dr. Waleed, the chapter Al-Jinn represents the ultimate server migration. It's like a hostile takeover of the frequency. The CEO steps in and says, shut it down, shut down the Eastern servers completely, block all the old IP addresses.
Yes, a total shutdown.
And the old eavesdroppers, which he maps to the sorcerers in Petra, are permanently locked out of the system. The signal goes totally dead for them.
And importantly, Dr. Khaled Waleed emphasizes that the signal doesn't just go dead, it is decisively shifted. He argues that the broadcast is entirely rerouted to the west.
To the west.
Specifically to what he identifies as Bakkah, which is Jerusalem or Al-Quds.
Right.
Within his theory, this isn't just a change in channel. It's a geographic relocation of the divine signal.
That's fascinating. The thematic implication here within his matrix seems to be about purity of transmission.
Very much so.
He's suggesting that you cannot establish a new, pure message on a corrupted channel. Before the new message can be downloaded into Bakkah, the corrupted, eavesdropping channels of the East must be definitively, structurally shut down.
Right.
You basically have to wipe the compromised hard drive before you install the new operating system.
That is the exact sequence of logic in his theory. You must secure the connection first. Dr. Khaled Waleed places this chapter as phase 1 because it's the structural prerequisite for everything that follows.
It sets the baseline.
Exactly. The universal law of guidance cannot be properly transmitted if the line is still being tapped by the bad tree. Therefore, his reading of Al-Jinn establishes a secure, exclusive connection in the West.
Okay, so if the Eastern servers are offline and the secure connection is now glowing in the West, in Bakkah, the structural stage is set. But a signal needs a receiver.
Naturally.
How does Dr. Khaled Waleed map the introduction of the figure who is meant to actually receive this newly secured broadcast?
Well, he argues that this is the specific function of phase 2 of his matrix. The network is live, and the receiver is introduced in the second chapter of the sequence, Al-Muzammil.
Al-Muzammil, which translates to the enfolded.
Right. And Dr. Khaled Waleed is very specific about the persona being addressed here. He doesn't refer to just a generic prophet. He assigns a specific functional title to this phase.
What's the title?
In his framework, Dr. Khaled Waleed assigns this chapter to the persona of Muhammad, the bringer of glad tidings. And he breaks down the psychology and the spatial geography of this phase with extreme precision.
Okay, walk me through that.
According to Dr. Waleed, phase 2 is the stage of gathering internal monotheistic energy.
Gathering internal energy, the enfolded. That's a highly evocative term, right?
Yeah.
When you enfold yourself, you're wrapping yourself up. It's intensely internal, solitary, protective.
That's exactly how Dr. Khaled Waleed defines this action. It's the prophet wrapping or enfolding himself in the heavy, immense burden of pure monotheism.
Like putting on armor.
Kind of, yeah. It represents a period of intense, concentrated internal preparation. And geographically, Dr. Waleed locates this internal gathering specifically within the secure center of Bakkah in Jerusalem.
Let's use another analogy here to visualize the mechanics of this. If phase 1 was securing the server, phase 2 feels like charging a massive capacitor. Or maybe an immune system analogy is better. It's like an immune system preparing for a threat. The body is internally analyzing the environment, gathering its resources, and producing specific antibodies deep within the lymph nodes.
I like that.
And in Dr. Waleed's map, those lymph nodes are Bakkah. You are inside, securing your defenses, absorbing the intel before the storm hits.
The immune system analogy works incredibly well for his framework. because what is being absorbed in that internal state is not just peaceful revelation, it is the severe strategic warning.
Oh, a warning.
Yeah. This is where Dr. Khaled Waleed ties the matrix back to his foundational analogy of the rebellious son. The immune system is being programmed with the signature of the virus it needs to fight.
Okay, so if you're listening and wondering how a chapter about being enfolded connects to the warning about the rebellious son, let's look at the exact mechanism Dr. Waleed uses to link these concepts.
Right.
How does the cautionary tale actually manifest in this specific phase of internal preparation?
Well, in Dr. Khaled Waleed's analysis of Phase 2 Al-Muzammil, God commands the prophet to stand and recite in preparation to face the tyranny of the East. And to prepare him, the text uses Pharaoh and Moses as the prime historical example.
Wait, hold on. If the core warning of Dr. Waleed's theory is about the children of Israel breaking the covenant, why is the Matrix introducing Pharaoh? A listener might be super confused as to why the archetypal enemy suddenly shifts to an Egyptian king.
Right, it seems like a pivot. But that is where Dr. Khaled Waleed's analytical framework requires a deeper look. He interprets this warning through a structural archetypal lens.
Archetypal, okay.
In his theory, Pharaoh does not merely represent a historical individual. Pharaoh represents a specific spirit or system, the spirit of financial and political arrogance.
Ah, okay.
Dr. Waleed argues that this is the exact same corrupting spirit that infected the children of Israel when they rebelled in the Blessed Land.
I see the connection he is making now. He's arguing that Pharaoh is just the ultimate embodiment of the corruption of wealth and absolute power.
Yes, Dr. Khaled Waleed emphasizes that God destroyed Pharaoh's system precisely because of this financial and political arrogance. Therefore, by structurally presenting the story of Pharaoh during this internal gathering phase, the text is actually programming the new believers with a stark warning about the historical failures of the children of Israel.
That's an indirect warning.
It's an archetypal warning. It tells the reader, look at the corruption of absolute power. Look at what happens when a system relies on political and financial arrogance. It gets destroyed.
Wow.
This is the specific intel being encoded into the immune system during the enfolded phase.
That is a highly specific mechanical argument. You are in the internal phase, enfolded in the pure signal in Bakkah, and the very first antibody your system produces is designed to fight the corruption of power, because that's exactly how the previous covenant was broken.
Precisely.
It's entirely preparatory. But, I mean, an immune system doesn't just sit in the lymph nodes forever, right? If this is a dynamic cognitive defense matrix, how does Dr. Waleed transition from this internal preparation into active outward defense?
According to Dr. Khaled Waleed, that transition is not left to chance at all. It's the exact structural purpose of Phase 3.
Phase 3.
Yeah, you cannot stay enfolded indefinitely. The internal energy has to be released. And that brings us to the third chapter in his matrix sequence, Al-Mudatheh.
Which translates to the cloaked.
The cloaked, yes.
Now, linguistically, enfolded and cloaked might seem like synonyms to a casual reader. You're covering yourself in both scenarios. But in Dr. Waleed's structural matrix, they serve functionally opposite purposes, correct?
They are completely opposing forces in his map. If Phase 2 was internal preparation and charging the capacitor, Phase 3 is what Dr. Khaled Waleed explicitly calls the kinetic launch.
The kinetic launch.
It is the discharge. The persona being addressed shifts dramatically here. We're no longer dealing with Muhammad the bringer of glad tidings. The Matrix now introduces the persona of Ahmad the warner.
Ahmad the warner. So the posture shifts from receiving to projecting.
It's a radical shift in posture. Dr. Khaled Waleed contrasts this sharply with the internal gathering of Bakkah. Ahmad the warner represents outward, explosive movement.
Moving out.
The prophet is no longer wrapping himself in isolation. He is donning the garments of public confrontation. He is structurally commanded to launch outward, to warn the worlds, and, as Dr. Waleed phrases it, to purify the cognitive system.
So let's follow the logic of Dr. Waleed's immune system analogy here.
Okay.
If the posture changes from internal gathering to an outward kinetic launch, does the nature of the cautionary tale change as well?
It does.
Because in Phase 2, the internal warning was about Pharaoh, representing the corruption of wealth and power. What is the specific virus that Ahmad the warner is launching outward to fight in Phase 3?
Well, the structural genius of Dr. Khaled Waleed's theory is how perfectly the warning shifts to match the new posture. Instead of focusing on political or financial arrogance, Dr. Waleed points out that Al-Mudatheh uses Israel himself as the direct warning.
Israel himself.
But he focuses on a very specific archetypal aspect. He terms it Israel the detached.
Israel the detached. Okay, what is the mechanism behind that term? What exactly are they detached from in Dr. Waleed's framework?
In his analysis, they are detached from the divine signs, from the pure vertical revelation. Dr. Khaled Waleed unpacks this concept as the archetype of the intellectual arrogant.
The intellectual arrogant.
Yeah. If Phase 2 was a structural warning against the corruption of power and wealth, Phase 3 is a warning against the corruption of intellect and esoteric knowledge. This phase warns against the model of Israel that, according to Dr. Waleed's reading, thought and calculated.
Thought and calculated. To a modern listener, thinking and calculating sounds like a positive trait, you know? It sounds analytical. How does he frame analytical thinking as a cosmic warning?
Because within Dr. Khaled Waleed's specific framework, the text isn't condemning pure reasoning. It's condemning what he specifically identifies as magical and Talmudic thinking. He argues this is an intellect that has willfully detached itself from the pure divine guidance downloaded in Bakkah, and instead relies solely on its own earthly, convoluted machinations.
Right.
It's the profound arrogance of believing that human calculated intellect can outsmart, manipulate, or replace the pure vertical signal.
So, to synthesize this for the listener, because this is a really complex duality Dr. Waleed is building, he's arguing that the text is structurally engineered to inoculate the reader against two entirely distinct existential threats.
Yeah.
Phase 2 produces antibodies against the corruption of wealth and absolute power, using the archetype of Pharaoh. And then Phase 3 launches T cells to attack the corruption of intellect and knowledge, warning against Israel the detached, who relies on magical thinking and manipulation.
Exactly. It creates a comprehensive 360-degree cognitive defense perimeter. Dr. Khaled Waleed's matrix argues that a community usually breaks a covenant in one of two ways, through the sheer arrogance of power, or through the subtle arrogance of manipulated intellect.
And the sequence provides a defense against both.
Yes.
You know, to really grasp the mechanical precision of Dr. Khaled Waleed's structural theory, we shouldn't just talk about these phases in isolation. Let's look at how he actively connects them.
Yeah, the connection is key.
He actually provides what he calls a table of graphic twinning in his research, right? Where he lays Phase 2 and Phase 3, al-Muzamel and al-Mudathir, side by side to prove they are structurally engineered to interlock.
He does. He explicitly compares these two prophet personas point by point to demonstrate how they form a complete, unified line of cognitive defense.
So let's act as proxies for the listener here and carefully unpack Dr. Khaled Waleed's table of dualities. He breaks it down into 4 distinct structural comparisons. What is the first point of comparison he makes between the two phases?
The first point in Dr. Khaled Waleed's table is the address. He looked at how the text initiates contact in each phase. In al-Muzamil, the address is OU unfolded.
Right.
As Dr. Waleed analyzes it, this represents the gathering of internal knowledge. It's the coalescing of monotheistic energy deep within the secure center of Bakkah. The mechanical force here is centripetal. It's moving inward toward the core.
Centripetal force.
Conversely, in al-Mudathir, the address is OU cloaked. This represents centrifugal force energy moving outward. It's the kinetic launch required to confront the polytheistic villages outside the center.
So mechanically, Dr. Waleed sees one chapter functioning as an implosion of energy and the next as an explosion of energy.
Exactly.
What's the second point of comparison in his table?
Dr. Khaled Waleed categorizes the second point as the direction of connection. In the enfolded phase, the text's command is to stand the night. Dr. Waleed interprets this structurally as a purely vertical connection.
Vertical.
Yes. The prophet is connecting directly upward to the throne of the merciful. The purpose of this vertical connection is to receive what the text calls a heavy word.
That's the pure download from the secured server we talked about earlier, the vertical transmission.
Exactly right. But in the cloaked phase, the text command changes to arise and warn. Dr. Khaled Waleed argues this is a shift to a horizontal connection. The prophet takes that heavy word received vertically and broadcasts it outward, horizontally across the geographical landscape to humanity, with the goal of establishing the ultimate proof. You have vertical reception in Phase 2, immediately followed by horizontal transmission in Phase 3.
That is a fascinating mechanical argument for why these two chapters have to sit next to each other in his matrix. I mean, a vertical line intersecting a horizontal line creates a coordinate. It literally plots a point on a map.
It does. It's incredibly precise.
What is the third point of comparison Dr. Waleed makes?
The third point brings us back to the dual warnings we synthesized earlier. Dr. Khaled Waleed contrasts the two specific cautionary tales embedded in the phases. On the internal vertical side, you have the warning to the descendants against financial and political arrogance.
Embodied by Pharaoh.
Exactly. Pharaoh and what Dr. Waleed calls the alternative king. On the external horizontal side, you have the warning against intellectual and magical arrogance. This is embodied by Israel, the detached, the archetype of the one who thought and calculated.
So the defense line is structurally complete. It protects the community against the corruption of the hand, which is power and wealth, and the corruption of the mind, which is intellectual arrogance. It covers both vectors of attack.
It does.
And what's the final fourth point of comparison in his pairing table?
The final point is crucial because it ties his entire theory back to the geographical map. He calls this point the geographical outcome.
Outcomes.
Yeah, what physically and spiritually happens when these two phases are activated. According to Dr. Khaled Waleed's analysis, the outcome of Al-Muzamil, the internal vertical gathering, results in the permanent stability of the ancient house filled with revelation in the West. It permanently anchors the divine signal in Bakkah.
It fortifies the server room. It establishes the unmovable center of truth.
Yes. And the outcome of Al-Mudathir, the outward horizontal kinetic launch, results in driving the people of pluralism, the people of intellectual detachment, and the corrupted elements of the East into what the text explicitly calls Sakar.
And Sakar, in the textual context, refers to a deep, burning place in hell.
That is correct. Dr. Khaled Waleed argues that the outward warning serves a geographical and conceptual purpose. It pushes the corrupted elements of the bad tree out of the protected, pure sphere of Bakkah, driving them toward ultimate ruin and separation.
Just to reiterate for you listening, we're outlining Dr. Khaled Waleed's specific architectural mapping here. He is making the case that you simply cannot read these chapters as disconnected poems or sermons or random historical reflections.
Right, they're interlocked.
In his matrix, the symmetry is just too engineered. You have a secure connection established in the West, a vertical download of pure monotheism, a horizontal broadcast of the warning, and a dual-layered defense system against both power and intellectual corruption.
It functions as a complete machine.
It really does. But, any machine designed to process conflict and establish defense lines eventually requires a final output. There has to be a resolution to the tension the matrix has built up.
A settling of accounts is structurally necessary. Once the truth is broadcast, internalized, and weaponized outward as a defense, Dr. Khaled Waleed's matrix demands a final resolution. The defense system has identified the threats. Now the system must execute a final judgment.
And that demand for resolution brings us to the final two chapters of the sequence. Phases 4 and 5 of Dr. Khaled Waleed's matrix. That's Al-Qiyamah and Al-Insan. The reckoning and the dismantling.
Yes.
Let's examine phase 4 first, Al-Qiyamah, which translates to the resurrection. How does Dr. Khaled Waleed position this chapter within his spatial temporal map? What's its functional purpose?
Well, if the previous phases were about establishing the defense perimeter and identifying the corruption, Dr. Khaled Waleed views Al-Qiyamah as the courtroom.
The courtroom.
He explains that after the doctrines of the bringer of glad tidings and the warner are firmly established against the system of detachment, this chapter serves as the ultimate inescapable trial. He specifically defines this phase as the gathering of truth and settling of accounts.
The courtroom analogy is super compelling. And I noticed a very specific, almost legalistic phrase Dr. Khaled Waleed uses when describing this phase in his text. He states that in this courtroom, there is no room for geographical forgery or altering words.
Yes, that's a key phrase.
What does that mean mechanically within his theory? How does one commit geographical forgery?
That is a critical point in his structural analysis because it refers directly back to the warnings in phases 2 and 3.
Yeah.
Remember, the warning against the manipulation of intellect and magical thinking.
Right.
Dr. Khaled Waleed is arguing that Israel the detached historically used intellectual arrogance to forge geographical claims and alter the meaning of divine words to maintain control. But in the phase of Al-Qiyamah, all those intellectual manipulations are rendered functionally useless.
So if the corrupted elements relied on Talmudic calculation or magical thinking to twist the truth or to claim false authority over the broadcast, Al-Qiyamah is the phase where the raw, unalterable data is finally exposed.
The ultimate ledger is opened.
Exactly. You cannot hack the system anymore. You cannot forge the geography to claim the center is somewhere else. You cannot alter the broadcast frequency.
Exactly. Dr. Khaled Waleed states that the divine declaration in this phase is absolute. It is, in his words, upright and cutting off the root of denial from the children of Israel.
Wow.
The absolute truth of the cosmic struggle. The reality of the good tree versus the bad tree is laid bare without any room for intellectual escape. The courtroom phase permanently solidifies the reality of the map.
The ledger is settled. And once the truth is absolutely established in the courtroom, Dr. Khaled Waleed moves to the final chapter of the sequence to provide the philosophical conclusion of his entire matrix. Phase 5, Al-Insan, which simply translates to man.
It's the capstone of his structural theory.
It's interesting, though, that a matrix so heavily focused on cosmic struggles, geographical server migrations, and archetypal battles between specific trees ends with a chapter broadly titled Man. From a structural perspective, it feels like a massive cinematic zoom out.
Dr. Khaled Waleed argues that it is an intentional structural zoom out. He posits that this final chapter serves as the ultimate dismantling of the detached Israelite model.
How so?
He explains that Al-Insan zooms all the way out to the very genesis of existence and the fundamental assignment given to humanity as a whole. It strips away the specific geographical battles of the previous places and looks at the absolute core of human nature and choice.
And how does he connect this broad philosophical conclusion back to his highly specific foundational analogy? Like, how does man resolve the struggle between the good tree and the bad tree that initiated this entire matrix?
He connects it through what he identifies as the ultimate inescapable dichotomy presented in the text of Al-Insan. Dr. Khaled Waleed breaks down the final message of the matrix. Humanity is shown the path. The universal law of guidance is laid out clearly through the previous 4 phases.
Right.
And at the end of that path, according to this chapter, man inevitably ends up in one of 2 states, either grateful or ungrateful.
Grateful or ungrateful. It collapses all the complexity of the matrix into a single binary outcome.
It is completely binary. And this is where Dr. Khaled Waleed makes a very specific linguistic and theological connection to close his framework. He equates the ungrateful state, the specific Arabic term used in the text is kafur, directly with his archetype of Israel.
Let's slow down and look at the exact mechanism Dr. Waleed is using to link these concepts. How does he linguistically or structurally justify equating a general term like kafur with his specific archetype of the bad tree?
Dr. Khaled Waleed argues that within the structural logic of the matrix, the ungrateful model is defined as the one who willfully rejects the pure guidance after it has been clearly established.
Okay.
He states that this is the exact historical and structural definition of the rebellious son who broke the covenant. Therefore, the kafur is the ultimate manifestation of Israel, the one who replaced the good tree with the bad tree, despite knowing the universal law of guidance.
So the rebellious son from the father analogy at the very beginning of his theory is ultimately structurally defined in phase 5 as the kafur, the ungrateful one who rejected the perfectly engineered defense system.
Yes. And conversely, Dr. Khaled Waleed points out that gratitude is structurally defined as the hallmark of the righteous prophets who reside in the abode of peace.
Right.
They are the ultimate enduring expression of the good tree, the children of Adam, who successfully upheld the covenant and remained tethered to the pure broadcast.
When you laid it out from beginning to end, you can see how Dr. Khaled Waleed has constructed a totally closed-loop system.
It is very tight.
We started with his premise of a father using a rebellious son as a psychological cautionary tale. We watched the compromise broadcast get moved from the east to the west in Elgin.
Yep, the server migration.
Right. We watched the prophet enfold himself to receive the pure signal and generate internal defenses against the corruption of power in Amuzermil. We watched him launch outward to warn against intellectual corruption and magical thinking in Al-Mudathir. We entered the inescapable courtroom of absolute truth in Al-Qiyamah. And finally, in Al-Insan, we arrive at the stark binary choice. Be grateful and align with the good tree, or be ungrateful and align with the bad tree.
To summarize Dr. Khaled Waleed's protocol, this sequence of 5 chapters is a strict educational, psychological, and spatial environment. He argues it maps a definitive defensive perimeter, designed specifically to keep humanity from falling into what he calls Israelite detachment.
And just to clarify his terminology again for the listener, Israelite detachment, in his framework, is defined as that dangerous state of cognitive panting, of clinging to the earthly mud of the East, of relying on corrupted magical intellect instead of remaining tethered to the pure vertical revelation.
Exactly. Dr. Khaled Waleed's entire matrix exists to prevent that specific cognitive detachment. Simultaneously, it is engineered to ensure that believers remain firmly tied to the single secure broadcast emanating from the center of Bakkah.
Remaining tethered.
Yes. His theory posits that the text is designed so that the reader drinks only from the pure knowledge of the righteous prophets, remaining completely safe behind the cognitive defense line established by the structural twinning of al-Muzammil and al-Mudaththir.
If you are listening to this right now, regardless of your personal background or beliefs, I want you to just sit with the sheer density and the architectural ambition of Dr. Khaled Waleed's structural theory.
It's a lot to take in.
It is, but appreciating the intellectual rigor of mapping an ancient text this way is a really profound exercise. It completely transforms the basic act of reading. It takes ancient texts that people have chanted, recited, and read linearly for centuries, and asks you to navigate them as a literal spatial temporal roadmap.
Under Dr. Waleed's framework, you aren't just reading words on a page, you are actively walking through a designed cognitive space.
Exactly. You are witnessing the server migration, you are stepping into the internal bunker to build immunity, you are launching into the public square to dismantle corrupted intellect, and you are standing in the final courtroom of absolute truth. It is the ultimate expression of contemplation engineering.
It demands a completely different, highly active level of engagement from the reader. You are no longer permitted to be a passive recipient of a historical story. Dr. Khaled Waleed's framework forces you to become an active participant, navigating a complex, perilous cosmic geography.
It changes the question from what does this text say to what is this structure trying to build inside my mind? And that actually brings me to a final provocative thought to ponder. Something to chew on after we wrap up this deep dive into Dr. Khaled Waleed's work.
I'm curious, what's your takeaway?
Well, if Dr. Khaled Waleed's architectural approach holds true, if ancient scriptures contain these highly engineered, matrix-like cognitive defense lines, what other hidden maps might exist within texts we thought we already perfectly understood?
That is a great question.
If we stop reading these ancient books simply as chapters in a linear story and start reading them as complex three-dimensional blueprints, are we simply reading these texts? Or are these unseen ancient structures subtly trying to program our cognitive geography?
It really makes you wonder.
It does. The next time you open a text, ask yourself, who actually built this hallway and where are they truly trying to lead my mind?